welcome back to another episode of the Fire Your Boss podcast with Suzanne Lee. Today we have another story for you guys with my dear friend Mike McLeish. He was an electrical engineer, and he heard the nudge of it wasn't fulfilling for him to be in engineering when he was in college. And he finally learned about real estate investing. He started the business while he was still working with the Airforce, and then he finally took the leap of faith to really go all in full time into his real estate business. And it's very similar to what other stories we've heard before, where that nudge was always there and it never went away. And for Mike's case, when the pain was strong enough that he doesn't want to stay in that corporate environment anymore, working with all those people, he finally, with his wife's support, just resigned and really went all in into his real estate business. I learned so much about him, and he is just such a positive person. I hope you enjoy his story as much as I did, learning about his childhood as well. He actually grew up in an entrepreneurial family where his dad was farming, and so that was a pretty unique perspective. And so without further ado, here is Mike McLeish. Welcome to another episode. We have Mike McLeish with us today. He's one of my friends that I met in beginning of 2024, really. And we've been in a mastermind together every single week just to work on our goals and just to bring ourselves to the next levels. And so super happy to have you here with us, Mike. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here on your show. So thanks for having me on.
I really wanted to record your story as well because we have very similar backgrounds. I know we both came from engineering, but I actually haven't heard much of your story yet of how you left your job. So could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you were at, and what you're doing right now?
Okay, so I'll give you the very broad overview. I went to school to be an engineer years and years ago. Back in what was that? I think I graduated from high school in '96. I graduated from college with an engineering degree, electrical engineering from Montana State University in 2001. Yeah, must have been 2001. And went into the Air Force. I had an ROTC scholarship, so I actually went into the Air Force to do engineering work for the Air Force for a period of time. I went back to school. I didn't like my current job, and the best thing you can do is, hey, let's just find something else to do. So I was like, well, I wanted to get a master's degree anyway, so I positioned myself to get a master's degree at the Air Force Institute of Technology. So I went down that path, and I was kind of building this career path in my mind of like, when I get out of the Air Force, I'll have some technical job, I'll have a master's degree. I didn't really quite know what that meant yet, but I knew I wanted the degree. So went to school, got that master's degree, and at the end of that program, that's when I really started to question, is this really what I want out of a career? I started to really question, is this really what gets me excited? Is this what gets me out of bed? And I figured there's always going to be some kid that's several years younger than me, twice as smart, and 3 times as excited to do this work. I just wasn't feeling it. So I started kind of into this no man's land here for a couple of years. After I got that degree, ended up Eglin Air Force Base working in a lab there, which was fun. It was a cool gig. But my next promotion basically said, you're going to be into the leadership side of things. You're going to go into more of the political side of the Air Force, which I just wasn't really too excited about that either. So that's kind of where I was on and I hope I'm not getting into too many details here. But long story short, I'll kind of skip to the end here, and then if you want me to fill in the gaps, I will. I basically got out of the Air Force. There was a program where they're like, well, your career field is overstaffed, so we're going to give a little bit of money away to incentivize some people to pull the ripcord early and get out. So I did. I jumped out, and I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do here at this point, but I had a little money in the bank. I did some traveling and started my first business with my now wife, Kim, which was like a CrossFit gym. So we opened up a gym, and we didn't make any money for like 2 years, but we had a good time. We learned a lot. And then I went back into civil service. We got married officially at that point. I had to get a job that was paying us. So I went back into the engineering path. And that's when I was like, oh man, is this really what I want? I went back into that, like, not so sure this is it. Ended up transferring here to Colorado Springs. And that's when I really started reading some books about getting out, financial freedom. I was reading 4 Hour Work Week. I started going to some clubs. Gosh, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. That was really the catalyst that kicked it off. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad that led me to, I can't figure out a way to make this a shorter story, so I'm just going to go through the whole thing.
Please tell us all.
So I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it was right after my son was born. He was like 2-3 weeks old. There's actually a picture of me taking a nap with him, and he's all bundled up in blankets, and the book is laying right next to my pillow. And that was really the catalyst moment of like, okay, I've got to figure this out. And in that book, it said go to investing club meetings. So I went to like meetup.com and I started looking for clubs that deal with investing. And I found a real estate investing club. So I'm like, well, let's do that. And they had a hot seat night, and I raised my hand. I got on the hot seat, and I ask anything, right? I'm like, I want to make a whole bunch of money really fast. What do I do? And they're like, well, you should wholesale houses. I'm like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. What's wholesale houses? So very quickly just gave me the brief description. He wasn't pitching this at the thing. It was Michael Jake, for those of you that might know him here in Colorado Springs. He wasn't pitching any courses or anything, but I looked him up and I found that he actually did have a course on wholesaling. So I bought that as a Black Friday special or Cyber Monday or whatever the thing was back then. And so I invested a little bit of money, bought this course, an online course, and went through it like several times. And I was like, okay, I know what to do. And man, this is where engineering maybe didn't help me a whole lot, because as you know, Suzanne, engineering is like, you want to know all your constraints and you want to be in this 5% unknown area, right? Everything else, 95% of your world is known. And so I had an entire education and career behind me saying, you have to know everything before you make a move. At least that's the way I interpreted it. So it was really hard. I was scared. It was scary enough to spend like whatever it was, $250, $500, $1,000, whatever it was on that training. But now it's like, hey, Mike, you've got to spend money on marketing. I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I don't trust myself. I'm not sure this is going to work. So I tried to do things the hard way, which is like, let's go to Craigslist. Let's post ads. Let's do free stuff. Let's try to find phone numbers online for free and call them. And eventually, I was getting a little traction, but it wasn't quite fast enough. I realized I do need to spend some money. I actually took a different job after having read 4-Hour Workweek and inspiring me to try to find a job that helps me work from home a little bit. So back then, teleworking became a thing, working for the government. And so I would do my job that I was required to do. And if I was able to work my own thing ethically, I would. So I was working from home. I would do my job for the organization. And then I was writing out letters. I was writing out marketing. I was handwriting everything and started my own little driving for dollars system. I found ugly houses and I'd mail them and I'd call them. And eventually, I think a year and a half later, did my first deal. So that was September of 2014, I did my first deal. And it was like a $35,000. Actually, it was a $10,000 deal. And like a month later, I did a $35,000 deal in Denver. And I was like, okay, once, maybe it was lucky, twice, okay, maybe we have something here. So that's when I really started to think, okay, where do we go from here? And I kept trying to keep that corporate job and continuing to do all the real estate things. So over the next year and a half, my wife, Kim, she's like, what? We've got our son, he's 3 years old. We've got another one, or actually he's 4 years old. I got another one on the way. You're never home, you're always, when you're home, you're just working, right? And you hate your job, but you're always working on real estate. And like, you have to make a choice, dear husband. You get to do real estate full time, and I've got your back, or you've got to go into your normal job, stop complaining about it, and just enjoy the corporate life and be with your family. So I'm like, well, all right. This is scary, but if you've got my back, if you support me, let's go full-time into real estate. So fortunately for us, we did have equity that was built up in our home because the Denver market kind of was in a boom. I mean, it really boomed after this, but it was enough that we had a little bit of like $100,000 to play with after we sold our house. So uncharacteristic of myself, we had a baby. We sold our house. I bought a house sight unseen in Greenville, South Carolina. I fired my boss. I moved my family across the country and started a new business in about 90 days.
Whoa.
So I don't know how I had the courage to do that, aside from Kim supporting me. And we spent a lot of time on our hands and knees praying and saying, is this what God wants us to do? And we just felt like, yep, this is the way. So we did it. Not for the faint of heart, right?
No. Oh my God.
Yeah. So why Greenville, South Carolina? It was almost arbitrary. I had some good friends that moved there that we knew in Florida, and it was like, it'd be cool to be around them again. And we're like, well, if we could live somewhere else, where would we go? We can't stay in Denver because if you sell your house, you're going to be upside down into the next thing unless you move into a really crummy area or downsize. So let's move. Where are we going to go? Well, our friends live here. And oh, by the way, it's warmer. It's a warmer climate. Let's try that out. So we moved to South Carolina. Really, I didn't know anything about it other than a couple web searches saying, yeah, it's got a pretty strong real estate market. So big leap of faith. And again, this is 2 years in the making after I did my first deal. So it's not like I did this flippantly overnight. It was honestly a little bit too slow, knowing now what I know. But that was it. So we made the leap, went full-time into real estate October of 2016, but really I didn't aggressively start marketing. I really officially say our company was started in January of 17. Since then, I've been full-time real estate investor. I've actually started 2 other businesses since then, but really on the real estate side of things, we got started in 2017. I didn't even hire anybody until late or mid 2018. I hired a virtual assistant and we started to grow. And in 2019, actually, we decided we didn't want to live in South Carolina anymore. We missed the mountain lifestyle. I had 2 salespeople working for me. We had a small staff, and we made another decision. Do we want to have an office, or do we want to run this company virtually and have a different lifestyle? I said, well, I want to be able to live anywhere. So let's design the business such that I can live anywhere. So we're like, well, let's test this out for about 90 days. And so when I hired my first salespeople, I said, look, you're going to work from home. Here's what you need to do. And I'm going to work from home, and I'm not going to go to properties anymore. So I started teaching my salespeople to go out to the properties without me being there. And that worked. So after 90 days, we're like, well, let's move. So summer of 2019, we moved back to Colorado Springs, and I've been operating the company virtually from here ever since. So that was 5 years ago now.
Wow.
So there's the short story.
A lot of changes, a lot of career changes, a lot of moves across the country. I want to dive in a little bit more about when you said when you were in college and you heard that nudge, is this what I'm really wanting to wake up to every single day? How did that start, and how did that look like for you?
Yeah, the nudge. So yeah, it was when I was in my master's program, and that was just, it was such a stressful season. To give you an idea, maybe this is not a big deal for some people, but for me, this is the pressure cooker of life. I mean, this is the hardest thing. ABET accreditation for a master's degree, electrical engineering, 48 credits. You might not even have to do a thesis depending on the school. Our school required us to do a thesis. We had to do 72 credits because the Airforce said, well, this is your full-time job. You got nothing else to do. So why don't you go ahead and do 72 credits with a thesis? Oh, by the way, do it in 18 months. So we had 6 quarters to do 72 credits of technical engineering classes.
Oh my God.
And this is a pretty intense school. It's a pretty intense school. I'll leave it at that. Those, if you know, you know. So that was it. And it was really, I felt like behind the curve from the beginning, just doing the refresher courses. I was like, I barely understand the fundamentals, let alone going into the master's program. Got through it. I graduated. But in that time, I was like, what's the meaning of life? I was really questioning existential existence. I was like, what am I doing here? What's the purpose? So that was really the beginning of like, maybe technical work isn't for me. And I don't know. It was a little bit of a spiritual journey at the same time in that. It's like, what is my purpose in life? What am I trying to do? And so that nudge kind of got stronger and stronger. And that was why really when I left the Air Force, I was like, well, I don't like to do anything technical. The only thing I do like is I found this weird exercise program back then that was really new to people called CrossFit. And I was like, I like to help people. I like to serve. So why don't we do that? And I can help people, and that'll just be my first business. So, and we did. We helped a lot of people. And I mean, my favorite clients were those that were overweight. They were sick. They were in their 40s, their 50s, and they thought, no, this stuff isn't for me. And it was amazing to help them see a different path for their lives. So that was cool. But again, we took this road as far as it's going to go. I've never taken any distribution off the business. We need to pay the mortgage. It's time to go back to work. And that's when I really was like, man, the only thing I've got is this resume that says I'm an engineer. Flashed a resume, got a job. That was cool. But it was, again, it's the golden handcuffs. Like, how do I escape this career path?
Right.
So really what I started to do was, I think what got me over the hump was just starting to read, right? Like what have other people done to escape? What have other people done to find financial freedom? Mm-hmm. And so I kept leaning into reading. I read a lot of books. I wish I'd read more now than I did then. It was just it was a good habit. Mm-hmm. So I'd encourage anybody, if you're not really sure, just start reading as if this is maybe the path you want to explore, and find out what other people have done. You don't have to figure it out yourself. Mm-hmm. There's so many people that have done what you want to do. You don't have to figure it out. Like, just follow what they do. They write. That's why they wrote books, is to help you.
Yeah. How did you come up with the idea of even starting to read books or even search for the books? What prompted you to do that?
That's a good question. I suppose I've always had some kind of interest in like finances and businesses and stuff. And I don't know how to explain that. I always kind of thought I would have a business someday. And apparently my sister picked up on that energy, because she actually bought me Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it sat on my shelf for like 3 years. I mean, gosh, if I would have read that book 3 years earlier. So that book was actually gifted to me, but then I was just talking to people. I talked with like Edward Jones financial investment companies and some other private companies. And I was like, here's what I want to do. What do you think? And they would give me recommendations. They'd read this book, check out this podcast. I started listening to a lot of podcasts when I was driving. Again, now, I mean, it's so much, it was easy then, but it's so much easier now. Mm-hmm. Even TikTok, you can scroll through like 30-second reels on giving you some tips on how to escape the 9-to-5, how to find financial freedom, and just start feeding that. You get that hunger, just start feeding it, and the path will lay out before you. Yeah.
What were you looking for when you were reading so much in podcasts and all that? What were you really looking to learn for yourself?
It was all on freedom, as financial freedom, because in that career, we had what's called the Thrift Savings Plan, TSP, which the government offers employees. And it's just basically a 401k or a retirement plan. And we start looking at the numbers, and I'm just like, man, I'm going to have to put in like $900 a month. I wasn't even making, $70,000 a year, something like that. And by the time taxes are paid and the mortgage is paid and all that, it's not a lot. It's at that time it was okay. But it wasn't like lifestyle money. It was decent corporate job money. But it's like, well, I want to make $1 million, right? Okay, how do we do that? Well, I got to put that in the TSP. And if I save $800 a month, which is all I could eke out, in like 25 years, I'll have $1 million at whatever interest rate. I was like, this does not compute, right? Like, I'm going to miss 25 years of my life to finally begin doing the things I want to do. And, oh, by the way, inflation is going to eat that up before I get there. So, but what I was seeking though was financial freedom. So I was reading books on like, how do I find financial freedom? So that was the types of books I was reading, just kind of entrepreneurial mindset stuff. Mm-hmm. Again, the Robert Kiyosaki, Tim Ferriss kind of mindset really resonated with me.
Yeah. Those are Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was definitely my first book on even knowing what financial freedom is. I didn't even have that concept back then until a colleague introduced it to me. Hey, what's financial freedom? I'm like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And so I started reading that book. And you touched on, I want to touch on a little bit on what you said earlier. You said you always knew you wanted to be a business owner. How did that come to you?
Oof, that's a good question. Well, I didn't realize it, but I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. I didn't even realize it. I mean, it's crazy to me. It didn't even ring a bell until about 10 years ago. My dad was a farmer, right? Like the ultimate entrepreneur. Like, you've got to risk everything. You got to take your little nest egg and you got to buy seed and fertilizer and diesel fuel and equipment and plant, right? And cross your fingers that it's going to rain and it's not going to hail your crops out. And And my father's mindset, unfortunately, was he was just very down on his luck sometimes. And we had some hard years. We had a big drought in '88 and several other years in the '80s and '90s. And there was some tough years in there. So I never recognized that as a path to financial freedom. I didn't know any rich farmers. So I didn't really connect with like, that's a thing. It's funny. I did an exercise. I don't remember the purpose of the exercise, but it was just going through kind of a life story. I think it was from an entrepreneurial vein. And I remember when I was probably like 7, 8 years old, and I don't even know where the idea came from, but I painted these rocks and I put little googly eyes on them and I stuck them on there. And the owner of the grocery store, we were in a very small town, very, very small town. And the owner of the grocery store, somehow I asked him if I could sell my pet rocks in his grocery store. So he did. And they were like 50 cents each. So I sold a handful. I didn't sell a whole lot, but that was really the first thing I ever tried to sell. And I was like, wow, I just got like $4. That's pretty cool.
Wow.
So back in whatever I'm dating myself. In the mid 80s, that was pretty cool. So that was really the beginning. So I've always kind of had a little bit of a knack for that. I remember at school, in high school, we had the little soda machine, and they were 50 cents for the longest time. And then they raised it to 65 cents. And I got with a buddy of mine. It's like, hey, why don't we bring our own soda in here and we'll sell it for 50 cents. So we did. So we'd like fill our refrigerators at home, and then we'd bring it to school in our duffel bags. And then we had this little black market of soda pop on the side. And then the school said, no, you can't do that anymore. And they lowered their price back to 50 cents. So I guess I've always had a little bit of a knack for that. But I really stopped believing in that, because on the other side of things, I had this my mom was a career with the airline industry. My dad was kind of raised in the 60s of get a great career, do good in school, retire. And so that was actually instilled in me more as a child than being an entrepreneur. So I had those kind of ideas at odds at each other for a long time.
And how did you choose engineering for yourself?
I just had the knack.
Yeah.
There was an old cartoon about that, but yeah, I was always taking stuff apart. I was taking my toys apart as a kid. What we did on the farm, we did all the maintenance on the equipment. So, I constantly had bloody knuckles from taking things apart and putting them together and figuring out how they fit and how they work and how do you measure things. And so I thought I was going to be a mechanical engineer, but the Airforce says, no, we want electrical engineers. So, but I just had the technical kind of experience and mindset towards it.
Yeah. It sounds like almost that you had parents who were promoting the lifestyle of getting a degree, get a good career, and then you also had the Air Force telling you, hey, we need specialty in electrical engineering. And then do you think you had followed that path for somebody else?
That's a good question. Not kind of, but not really. I started that path thinking, okay, what has my environment told me? It's get great grades. Because I had this conversation with my dad when I was like a sophomore. Dad, how are you going to pay for my college education? And he's like, son, how are you going to pay for your college education? I'm like, ooh, what do you mean? He's like, you're paying for it. I'm not doing it. And so that was like, well, okay, it's on me to do good in school, keep my grades up. And my only ticket out of there was getting some kind of scholarship funds. So which was cool, because that, again, on the entrepreneurial side, it's up to you. If you're the entrepreneur, it's up to you. Even if you're not an entrepreneur, really, your outcomes in life are up to you. And that was probably one of the best gifts I got from my father, was pushing that ownership on me. Okay. So I worked hard. I got really good grades and graduated high in my class in high school and got a scholarship. But I was still open to something. And I even in college, I remember my buddy and I wanted to find a house that we could live in. So we were looking for ads, and we found somebody had a house that we could rent. Well, they were looking for 2 roommates. So this girl was basically, her dad owned the house. So we started talking with the father while he was there in town when we were doing our application process. Turned out he was an engineer, And he also learned how finances work on the side. So he was actually a financial advisor with a technical degree that gave him that background. So that kind of sparked the idea of like, oh, maybe if I had a advanced degree and I really started to understand how numbers work, I can use that process to develop into a different type of career. So that seed got really planted. It's funny, I don't think I've ever talked about this with anybody before, but I was like 21 years old when I was open to like those types of ideas, and that really formed my future from there.
Wow. And I want to touch a little bit more on your transition then from engineering, discovering your gift of you like the technical stuff and taking things apart. And how did it happen from going to engineering to real estate and to full-time into real estate?
Ooh, that was a tough one. Excuse me. So the good thing about engineering as a background is you have some understanding of process, especially if you delve into the world of systems engineering, which is more process. I mean, everything has a process, but you start to be able to compartmentalize things that go into a logical flow, right? And so that works really well with business because it's as simple as generate leads. There's a process for that. Follow up. There's a process for that. Make offers. There's a process for that, and close the deal, right? Like so it's a very linear process. So that worked really well with my mindset. And furthermore, I mean, then I go crazy and I over engineer everything. So when I started doing direct mail, it was like, okay, I'm going to build this massive spreadsheet, and every postcard or every prospect has a category, and I know like here's the schedule that I was able to mail them. So I was able to be very organized from the beginning, probably to a fault. It was a little slower than maybe it ought to be, where some people that don't have the engineering systems background, they're just like, oh, well, this course said send direct mail, so I'm just gonna, here's $10,000, send it all, and like the next month, like I don't know, send it all again. Like they don't really, and it works, right? Like it's just it's ready, fire, aim, where I was ready, aim, fire. So it both work. They're just a different way of doing things. So, but I had that like logical understanding of like let's put a process by it. Anything I do twice, I'm building a process so I don't have to reinvent the wheel again. So everything became checklists and process early on, which actually really, really helped because as soon as I started to hire, it was like, hey, new person, your new job is to take ownership of this process. I don't even have to teach you. It's all documented already.
Okay. So when you made the transition to leave completely engineering, you were already in business and did you already have a team back then?
I did not. No, I had hired a couple times. I'd hired like a cold caller before. It kind of worked. It was a little harder to manage. I think the hardest part though, just going back to your prior question though, was again, just trusting in like I could build a process, but there was nobody to approve it and say, well done, I'm going to pay you. That was the hardest part. It was trusting the process is going to work. And I really got tested in that because I quit my job in September, October, right? I was boots on the ground in South Carolina, October 2nd. And I did not do my first deal until June of the next year.
Wow.
And, that was scary because it's just trust the process, keep following up, keep talking to people, keep your feet moving. That's not what I'd ever been trained in before. So as good as a process is, you've got to trust that it's going to work and continue following that until it does. So for me, that was the hardest, the mental exercise. I spent a lot of time on my face praying.
Wow. I want to hear more. You mentioned Kim was supporting you and you knew she had your back, but what kept you going?
Fear. Well, because I mean, I already burned the ships.
Yeah.
I'm not going back.
Yeah.
Even though I probably could have, but I was like, I'm not going back. I am not going back to that career. It wasn't an option. It wasn't even like shucks, I'm going to go. It was not an option. Like, so it was just keep going. And because I don't want to let my family down. I got two young boys now, the newborn and I don't know, what's a 4-year-old? Not really a toddler anymore, but 2 kids. And they're looking to me like, Daddy, you got to show up. You got to feed us today. So that was the drive. It was like, I can't let my family down. And there was no turning back.
Yeah. And I want to backtrack a little bit in your story because you mentioned that when you left the job, you already had the business running. How did that decision process happen for you to really, okay, I'm done with it. I want to go all in into real estate?
I'm sorry, repeat that question again. I'm just trying to understand you.
Yeah. So how did the decision making happen for you to done with engineering? I'm going to go all into real estate.
Yeah, it was just, man, it was ever since that master's program of like, I'm not so sure engineering is the path for me. So really, it was a combination of things. I kept getting into jobs I liked less and less. That wasn't really on purpose, but that's the way it played out. Even though I had more flexibility to work from home, I really did not enjoy where I was at all. And that pain became, I mean, there's all kinds of analogies I can give you, but if you've ever seen Office Space, I mean, it was pretty close.
Yeah.
That movie Office. You just half the people are there just holding on. They're past middle age. They're almost retired. 10 more years and I'll retire. And it was just The Walking Dead. Yeah. And I didn't want to be The Walking Dead. I didn't want that for my life. And between that and again, my wife really giving me the nudge and the confidence to take that leap made all the difference. So kind of a threshold of like, the pain is here. There's no sunny side to this career path for me. And then my wife saying, hey, if you're not happy, you need to make the change because we need a happy father around the house here.
Yeah. Did you have any, what if this doesn't work?
Of course. Every day. I still do. But it goes away. I mean, anybody can start a business while they're working full time, right? They can start, they can learn, they can educate themselves, they can begin marketing, do whatever you can on the side, right? And so I was doing that. I'd already done a few deals on the side, part-time. And that gave me, again, and Kim, because I mean, typically ladies are more risk averse than men. So we kind of had a little bit of a role reversal, but even Kim, she's had moments where like, are we secure here? She felt secure enough because she'd seen successes that I'd had in this. And she's like, I believe in you. You should believe in you. And you've already proven it. Let's go. So again, if you can do this, you can do anything on the side part-time. Well, I shouldn't say anything, but there's a lot you can do. Build that confidence. Yeah. Get that process, get a few reps in, and then you decide like, hey, what's the best? Have you ever seen the Tim Ferriss Fear Setting?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
It's an old like TED Talk, but it's called Fear Setting. And I'm going to butcher this, but it's a whole exercise that you can go through. And it's like, I want to do this thing, right? And so the exercise is, what if I do the thing and I fail? All right. What does that look like? Literally write it out. Well, I'm out on the streets and I can't find any food and a bird poops on my head as it flies by. Like there's all these different like scenarios. And then one of the steps is like, what would I need to do to get back on track? And it was like, well, I could call these 5 people. I could get a job. I could apply. I could do this. I could get back on my feet. And what's the likelihood of that happening? Well, not really that high if I really think about it, right? So it kind of minimizes that boogeyman. Yeah. And even if the boogeyman arrives, he's not that hard to get away from, right? Yeah. You can get back. Right. On the flip side, if you do the thing and it's successful, what does your life likely look like? And it's like, wow, likely I would have this kind of lifestyle. Likely I would have this kind of income. What's the odds there's just like all these different like questions that you answer. And then now you have 2 scenarios. Like this is the worst case scenario. Yeah. Like realistically, this is the worst case scenario. And here's the likely outcome. And then you can decide like, is it worth taking the leap or not? That's a really, really powerful exercise if you take that seriously.
Yeah. Absolutely. I actually just did that exercise. One of the things that happened to me 2 weeks ago, I decided to leave the real estate, and that's the exact exercise that I did for me to take that leap of faith to leave burn my boat again for the second time.
Yeah.
To leave that industry. No, that exercise is super powerful because it shows you all the thoughts that you were scared of what if that happens, what if that happens, and when you write it down on paper, and that's the power of writing things down because it slows down your thinking, and when you write it out, it's like, oh, it's not that, it doesn't look that bad after all. It's like, what is the likelihood of that happening, right? And so I love that you mentioned that exercise.
Yeah. Well, it minimizes it minimizes the boogeyman. It makes the scary thing much smaller than it really is. Or I should say, we tend to maximize fear, so we make it bigger than it really is. And this just really puts it like, this is realistically as big as it is. Right. It's not any bigger, it's not any smaller, it's just realistic.
Yeah.
And the same on the upside, right? We tend to minimize the upside because it's new, it's different, it's scary. It's probably not going to work, right? But when you write it out, like you say, slow down, write it out. Has anybody done this before? Is there anybody that can help you? Do you have resources? You're going to find that it's actually, the opportunity is a lot bigger in most cases than you realize. So
Right.
it makes it very easy to make and maybe the decision is, nope, it's not worth the risk, right? But at least you're very objective about it.
Right. Yeah. And how did you find that confidence for you to move the whole family across the country?
I don't know. That was a gift from God because that was not, especially then, that was not my normal, that was not my normal way. But I guess I just believed I wanted the freedom bad enough to take that leap. I wanted it bad enough. The pain of staying where I was too great. And I was convinced and absolutely convinced now, it was right. That there was much more upside by taking that leap than there was staying where I was. How I got there, I don't hardly remember, but I mean, it was scary, but man, you talk about a happy moment is when you get to walk into your boss's office and fire him.
Yeah. How did that moment happen for you?
Oh, it was great. It's great.
What happened? Tell us about, yeah.
Like, hey, I even had it in my calendar, and then my phone reminder popped up and said, fire your boss, 9:00. I think I took a screenshot of it somewhere, but anyway, I walked in there. It's just like, hey, so I'm going to be leaving in 2 weeks. This is my 2 weeks notice. He's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, he goes, did you take a different position? And I'm like, no, I'm going to start my own business. He's like, but you're going to retire in like 12 more years. Like, no, I'm not. Not with you guys, not with the government. He's like, I don't know about this. Like, you're throwing away an amazing career. Like, you are going to burn everything that you worked so hard for. And I'm like, no, it's good. I'm good. I mean, he was just dumbfounded like that anybody would leave civil service. And I was like, no, I know well enough this is for me, and this career is not.
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Did you do that exercise of the worst case scenario from Tim Ferriss before you resigned?
No, I don't think I probably did it some other way, but I don't think he had posted that video at that time.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I think it was just more like logically, like, I mean, come on. I made more money in 2 deals than I had that was like 6 months wages that I did by writing 400 letters and making 400 or 500 phone calls. Like, that didn't take 6 months. I mean, that sounds like a lot of numbers, but if you make 20 calls a day, it doesn't take long to get 500 calls. Yeah. Right. So I did this over a long period of time. I was like, man, if I just do all that stuff full time, just imagine how much money I can make. So the math just made more sense. Again, logically reasoning it out. If I apply myself this way, I can't lose. I can stay and keep a desk warm and make $80,000 a year, or I can put a little bit of effort into it and I can make $80,000 over the next 30 days. So I went that route.
Yeah. So you had proof of concept already, and you had a lot of pain in the job. You had your wife Kim's support, and all that added up together. You're like, hey, I'm gonna go for my freedom.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And again, like it was a really good discerning season too. Like we spent a lot of time praying and like, is this the right thing? Is this what we want? And again, it's just, that tug was there for a long time. It was like, I got to stop being afraid of this. And that my biggest fault is I just moved too slow. Like I should have trusted the evidence in front of me a lot earlier than I did.
Mm-hmm. How long did that tug last?
You saying from like leaving the career to when I finally did?
Yeah, when you first had the tug till you took the leap of faith.
Well, I don't know. It depends on which iteration we were in, but I got out of the Air Force in, when was that? That was fall of 20. So right before that, I was like, I need to get out of this path. So I actually answered the tug, if you will, at that point, lost faith in myself and then got back into that career field. But it wasn't but 2 years later, I was like, I got to get out of here. So I think that was, I went back into civil service 9 and I had a pretty cool job there. I worked for about 2 years there, and then we wanted to live in Colorado. So we transferred to Colorado Springs, and it was pretty quick after that transfer. I was like, ooh, this job isn't nearly as fun as the other one. It's more office spacey. That was like, and then my son was born. I was like, this is the beginning of the end here. Okay. So that was really when it began. I think probably in 2011 was like, we got to get on a different path. Maybe 2012, but yeah. So it took me 4 years to really answer that call, and I could have done it much faster.
Yeah. Looking back, do you have any regrets of how it all happened?
No, it's made me I'm a completely different person in most good ways than I was. And I made a lot of mistakes, but that's part of it. Making those mistakes actually makes you a better entrepreneur versus playing it safe and not making those moves. By making mistakes, I'm like, okay, log that away. That's a lesson learned. We're not going to do that again. But I mean, honestly, I don't have any regrets over the whole process, other than I wish I would have trusted myself and trusted evidence in front of me more a little earlier. But I mean, it's just the way it had to be for me. But again, like, just if you're thinking about doing anything crazy like this, leaving your corporate job, and I don't think it's crazy, but if you're ever thinking about that, like, again, who has done this before? Read their books. Who in your circle of influence has done this before? Buy them lunch. Don't ask them to coffee. Buy them lunch. All right? It's worth it. That's a good investment. Okay? Buy them dinner if you need to. Right? Find a successful entrepreneur. Get in front of people that have done this thing before, and that's going to shorten your time frame down a lot. You don't have to figure this out yourself. So I think if I would have done more of that, again, you can borrow confidence, you can borrow belief from other people that have gone before you.
Yeah. I also think, and that's beautiful that you mentioned that, I also think that the timing of it all happens in the perfect timing for each of us. It's the whole development of that buildup of all that emotions, some of the pain in the business, and then your son's coming to the world, and then with your proof of concept, and then your wife's support, all that leading up were just the events leading up to that moment, right? And I think it happened in the perfect timing for you.
Yeah. I mean, how can I argue that, right? Yeah. It's just the way it had to be for me. But again, I think you just have to listen to, you got to listen to your heart. You got to listen to what's right, but also don't ignore the evidence in front of you, and try to be as objective about these decisions as possible, and less emotional, because the emotions can drive you the wrong direction.
Yeah. You answered this question a little bit already, but I'm still going to ask you, and I always end my podcast with the same question to all my guests. For somebody listening to us right now, they hear that nudge, but they are a little scared. What is one recommendation you would give them?
One recommendation? Oh, man. Don't ignore it. Okay? Don't ignore that little tug, that nudge. Indulge it. All right? Keep pulling the string. Keep pulling on that string and finding out where that path is leading you. And maybe it's not going to be what you want, right? If maybe you discover, this isn't really what I thought it was. But more than likely, you're going to find, as you start pulling that string, and like, who's done this before? What podcast kind of personifies what I'm even thinking about contemplating doing, right? Just start, I guess, just seek it. Like, don't ignore it, and then start seeking more knowledge about that thing and getting in front of, and that, again, it kind of just builds from there, right? So don't ignore it. Start getting some information. Once you've got just like, ooh, this is feeling pretty good. I'm liking this, what I'm learning about. Now go find somebody. Go find a mentor. Go find some advisors that have done this before and get like, tell me what's this really like, right? I'm thinking about doing this thing. What do I need to do? Yeah. And it's everything you're going to want is going to be given to you, right? Yeah. You're going to be told exactly where to look, what to read, what to study, or they're going to say that it's this and this, and you're going to say, okay, objectively, that's not the kind of risk for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an amazing recommendation because, like you said, there are people who've already been on that path for you that you want to take on. And that's one of the reasons why I want to do this podcast, because there are so many people who have already left their 9-to-5. And then having that mentor, people who've walked that path already themselves, can guide you through and then increase your potential of success so much quicker. Then you don't have to figure everything out by yourself. And I really appreciate that recommendation.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, though, is don't ignore that nudge.
Yeah.
Don't tuck it away. Yeah. Don't say, nah, that's not for me. Nah, I could never. Those are the voices that, in theory, subconsciously keep you safe, but they also keep you stuck. Mm-hmm. In my case, it kept me stuck for a long time because I kept tucking away. Nah, it's not going to work. I can't do that. I can't take risks. I can't, right? You get these negative things. So if you feel that nudge, you feel that, what if I did do that? Like, what would that look like? What could that feel like? And just indulge that, right? You don't have to take any risks. You don't have to spend any money. Just learn more about it. And then you can decide later objectively if it's for you or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike. One last question for you. If anybody wants to look you up and talk more to you about anything of your journey, where can they find you?
Probably pretty easy to find on social media, Instagram or Facebook. I get messages there all the time. And it's just Michael McLeish Official, at Michael McLeish Official. You'll find me there. It's probably the easiest way.
Perfect. And we'll add your name down in the show notes as well. And thank you so much, Mike. I love hearing your story of how all the journey that you went on growing up with your family and then with your wife and then the Air Force. I didn't even know all that about you. So thank you for sharing that.
You're very welcome. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on, and it's fun to share the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, for anybody out there, you're not alone. And if you want to listen more to any content like this, just so you can really have your confidence to take your own leap of faith and to find your own freedom, definitely tune into this podcast, follow and like and subscribe. And we'll see you at the next episode. See you later. Bye, everybody.